Yeah, whoever said shush, I love you. Great people. You're my kind of people. You know, obviously, if you know about the Hope Collective, you know that Niall thinks constantly about style, about branding. And he said to me, wouldn't it be great if we got everyone to wear black for the second panel? So some people got the text, but not everyone. But I thought the first panel was incredible, really interesting stories I didn't know. It's when you go digging, you find out the lives that people have had and how people have, you know, to quote Dylan Haskins' great film about Dublin DIY, you know, when people roll up their sleeves, it's incredible what they can achieve. And again, that's the theme of the second panel. And we're just going to go in order of where people sat down. So first off, we have Francis Rowe who's Francis Rowe anyway, but who was in Jam Jar Jail, who were, well done to whoever did that, that's fully deserving. You know, who one of these bands that didn't fit a type in Dublin at that time, and it was really exciting to see this band evolve and play, and the cassettes, to me, you're a cassette band in terms of the artwork. So again, Francis, like I've been asking everyone, like, where did music come into your life as something that wasn't just transient? Like, how did your love start for music?
Okay. Yeah. Well, my childhood. My father's. You're making signs. Okay. Yeah. The first panel was very inspiring. It's kind of lives unlived that you could have done if you had been a completely different person. But this is the person I grew from. My father was a Mantovani fan, and he thought rock and roll was very uncivilized. I tried to kind of, you know, once I started getting a sense of what the 50s had been, I started kind of prodding him as you do when you're 8 years old. So what did you listen to? But it was unfortunate for him because he had 5 children, 4 girls, and the top three eldest ones were obsessive stereo players. The first one was, as I remember it, I don't know how she remembers it, but she was this kind of camp hippie, hammer horror hippie. So it was Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, all sorts of things that were really scary and freaky and devilish and put the heart across you, but they were played constantly in a drawing room, absolutely stuffed to the gills with smoke, like just a solid brick of smoke, and hairy men with patchouli and hairy women with sandalwood. You know, and I respect them to this day. But that was just, I suppose that was the first really rock and roll experience I had in my drawing room every afternoon for a couple of years before my sister just legged it out of the house and ran her own very interesting life. The next one was the Shirley Bassey fan. She was 18 going on 32, kind of gin-soaked, heartbreak kind of music. And then the last sister, again older than me, we got a good stereo, but she nicked the album and brought it up to our bedroom, and she set it on, as the old record players do, that constant repeat. And yeah, she was the Joan Armour Trading fan, so yeah, a lot of that, a bit of Helen Reddy, and so I was kind of sleep trained. So unlike a lot of people who kind of got the music and went and sought it, and I didn't have that kind of authority over the record player. So yeah, I was kind of a passive smoker with respect to the straight edge people here. I absorbed it and I didn't miss it until I was around non-smokers. So that was that was my basic saturation. And then disco, when you're in like 12 years old, and Donna Summer is going absolutely insane. And there's songs you know you should be listening to. and that's a good start. And then then it moved on to art college and older friends and some of the local scene, then bands like the Baby Snakes, who were good and obnoxious. And then, what is it, yeah. But local bands, I was still more entranced by recorded music. So you would have the beginnings of electronica, John Fox Mathematics, still listening to chart music, but also, I mean, chart music was overlapping with some really good music as well. So you'd have The Cure, 17 Seconds, you'd have Susie and the Banshees, and just to say that punk was for a female trying to, female woman trying to access bands later on. It was very difficult to get, for me anyway, to get into hard-ass bands. It was, and I wasn't really the lead singer type, not in personality or looks. And the great thing about punk as a schoolgirl, especially for the females, like polystyrene, is that you had role models who were saying, fuck your aesthetics, fuck your sexuality, I'm going to dress in S&M and I'm going to rip my tights and you can fuck off. And that was so good. And you could be aggressive and musical. You could be obnoxious and stylish. And I know that sounds feeble, but when you're 14, that matters. And that was the thing, kind of moving into bands later on. Being in bands or seeking a band and then finding one, was that there was but always as a member of a participant in the audience, was that there's a kind of protection for women. I don't know if anyone else experienced it within the punk scene. You were safe to be enraged, you were safe to make massive nasty noise, you were safe to scream about forbidden things, and you would not be kind of shunned for it. It was part of the experiment, it was part of the exercise, it was part of the liberation. These are just words, I could say loads of words, I will stop there. But so moving into a band, kind of start, again, this passive smoking thing, I just absorbed it. I liked some, I didn't like others. But it took me a while, but I finally figured out that there were guitars and there were bass guitars. And the bass guitars were what I was listening to a lot. So I went to a music shop, had one flick of the string, what's a bass guitar, do you have one? Played it with one string and that was, okay, that's it. That's the instrument. So eventually got one, late 80s, shopped around for a band, finally connected with Shane O'Reilly from Jam Jar Jail, who was working with one of many blisteringly good drummers, Terry Hackett. We also had Eric Stover, and we had Peter Kennedy for a while, borrowed from the Golden Horde. I think may have been on a hiatus of that by then. But that was, I could just about play The Cramps, The Human Fly. If you know it, you'll enjoy it. Enjoy the reference. And Bauhaus, obviously, Bela Lugosi's dead. That was about it. And then I started being dropped in the deep end and playing some very complex, loud and noisy lines and banging on the pedals and discovering what a distortion pedal can do for a bass, and then a tremolo, and that was enough, just make it loud. But even then, you still needed a certain amount of cover because it was still quite sexist. Just the dinosaurs roamed. There was one particular venue run by one gentleman of great repute in terms of their contribution to rock and roll, but we were booked to play there. I was wandering into the back of the venue with my guitar and my amp, and it was a case of no girlfriends allowed. Some of you may know who this person is and what this legend is about. But it took about half an hour of some kind of weird negotiation going on in a back room where I'm watching, the guitarist having a big begging session with this old dude who looked like he came from, I don't know, it was a roadie. I know, I'll stop. But yeah, bitter feelings. But we did get to play. And then the plethora as a supporting band, you're paying with other people's equipment, and then you have guys jumping up and saying, no, that's not how a bass sounds. Like, you poor idiot, Oh no, it's a distortion band, it was. And then they walk away shocked. So I developed a very mean, rough demeanour. I stumped around, I became enormously unapproachable, but more productively, I bought a China graph pencil and made it the courtesy point of marking everybody else's settings and then changing them. So you learn adaptations, which is part of the work. But so we played for about 9 years. We developed a set that was at times confused. We sometimes we loved to be hated. We were kicked out of, we were barred, legend has it, we were barred from the Rock Garden 5 or 6 times. Once, the most memorable one was for being an insult to music. But yes, I do take that very positively. It's such a relief not to have to be arsed to be good. And yet we were good in moments. So there was this kind of weird fusion of chaos, the desire to just be infantile narcissists, which is not that uncommon, and also this ambition and pushing out demos to the best of our abilities and working really hard to get production as best we could, and again doing our own artwork because we come from our college background. So there was a lot of it was done by Shane. Posters, you also had some amazing posters coming out at that time. One artist who was working with that scene, which was kind of, certainly for us, it was centered around the Temple Bar rehearsal rooms. We got a cheap deal on a shared room. It was super cheap because it was directly, this is another war story. It was directly below the canteen toilet, and the pipes were broken. And there was carpet wet, and more carpet on top of that, and more carpet, and then cardboard. And I never had so many stomach bugs. It's like, God, I ate so much garlic. But it was fun. But so that was the Pet Lamb, Female Hercules. You had Dream Creeper. You had a lot of hardcore bands who kind of are still going in one form or, well, members of them are going, though some of them have mellowed, some of them are meaner and nastier than ever, which is great. So we're Temple Bar, rehearsal studios, what else?
No, I'm happy to help. It's great when you ask a question and someone just goes with it. But you emerged in a music scene that, as you said, was very sexist. It was primitive. It was basic. The rehearsal spaces. That's not the worst I've heard about. So glamorous rock and roll. The 1980s. People think, oh yeah, everyone was in a band, and all the bands are great. But I'm really intrigued that you mentioned some other, because to me you were a very confrontational band. You weren't there for everyone to have a nice, polite evening. But you mentioned the Female Hercules with Konzo and Dream Creeper. Like, did you feel a kinship when those bands finally came along? Because you were kind of ahead of them in terms of being very, very direct in, we don't care if you like us, we're going to play our set.
Well, we were a bit behind the main waves of the original, certainly the Irish punk scene. So, my first gig, I was 14, and punk had already kind of crested in its kind of initial incarnation, I suppose, maybe. I apologise if my time frame is way off, but there are far more erudite people here than me. But yeah, so sorry, what was the question?
Just when those other bands came along that were similarly,
Gotcha.
we don't give a fuck.
Right. So we had it was, I don't want to say grunge, so I'm not going to say it. I didn't say it, forget I said nothing. But it was that kind of amalgamation of the punk impetus with the obnoxiousness, with a lot of the American style that was coming through. And this is where we get into, I think, an important thing, especially about scenes like this and punk in general, and the DIY culture, not just punk, but again, punk is very big and very wide. But yeah, that sharing of culture and the cultural poverty that happens when people don't share. Even the internet, they talk about democratization of music, but you're still affected by the algorithm. The best source is still people, and people doing this. You hear people you'd never have presented to you. You have to go looking for it, and this is vital. Hope Promotions has always been vital. Just as one particularly excellent example. But yeah, so Shane, the big kahuna of the band, was in a relationship with a guy called Jimmy in the States. And Jimmy was desperate to find the next big thing coming out of Ireland's alternative scene. And Shane was desperate to find out what was going on in America. So they had a swap, cassette swap. So we got to hear Tad, we got to hear Skinny Puppy, we got to hear Mudhoney, we got to hear just the Cows, that whole Minneapolis scene that I love so much. So you were listening to, and you know, Babes in Toyland, another fantastic Minneapolis band. But yeah, so that kind of shifted. When I met him, he'd done quite a poppy demo because he had the craft, he had skills to do that. But I said, I'm never singing ooh, just no. It's like, I will sing fuck you, I will sing plenty of things, but I will not go ooh. Now, the Pixies came along and ruined that principle. So I stood by it. But yeah, so it was that sharing he had with this guy called Jimmy, and then he shared, I believe we shared the tapes around with other guys in the scene, and it was a lot of conversations were had. So yeah, so that lasted for a while. We didn't get rich, but we did have a lot of fun.
Right. Very good. And thank you, Francis. And passing the mic, next is Danielle Tor, who's from France. And we became friends through our mutual friend Michael McCahan.
Yes.
And
Who says hello?
brilliant.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, he sent a text message.
Fantastic. We'll be reading all the texts out after when people's gone home. But you were part of that really intriguing Paris punk scene. So how did music come into it? Were you from a musical family?
Not at all. Nobody played music in my family. There's no musical education. Musical education in French schools is much less than in any of the English-speaking countries. So, but I had a godmother, and she made me a punk before I was a punk. So at 3 years of age, she gave me a 45 tours single of Johnny Hallyday, which I'm sure you all know about. And the single was Killy Watch. And the words were Killy, 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 watch, 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 K-O-K-K-A-Ba, and so on. So at that stage, it was very fashionable for French singers to sing yogurt, pretend English. So anyway, so that was my entrance into the world of rock and roll. And I really loved that single. And then on the French radio, there were quotas at that stage. You know, they were only allowed to play so much English music. So at about 7 years of age, I think that really matches the time, I heard Good Vibrations on the radio, and I thought, okay, I'm in somewhere else. I just fell in love with the Beach Boys then. I'm a major Brian Wilson fan. I've been to see him about like 15 times or something like this. I've traveled the world. But anyway, so that really changed my ear, I think, totally. I think it really, really affected my ear. And then I went to secondary school, and then you're a teenager, so you come across Alice Cooper. And you fall in love with Alice Cooper as well. And you're good at English, so what do? There's no internet at that stage, so you can't really figure out what the words mean, but you have an album and the words are there, so you kind of take your dictionary and it doesn't make sense, but anyway, you still translate it. And I did become a translator as a result of liking Alice Cooper. Then with my money, my pocket money, I bought The Lamb Lies Down in Broadway by Genesis. And that really, and when I went to see the show in Bercy, 1976, I believe, and that really changed, I think, all our generation's perspective on music. You know, it really changed the progressive rock. And we just moved from Genesis to the Pistols, basically. But meanwhile, there was a scene in Paris that was developing, very much linked to the anarchist scene. So there was a kind of alternative rock music developing, punk music. And there's a friend of ours, I think, Rémi Pépin, who wrote a very good history of rebel rock. It's in French, unfortunately, but there was a genuine indigenous kind of scene developing in Paris, particularly in the squats, because they were the only people who would be putting those punk bands on, and all they wanted was basically a bottle of beer for payment. So there were kind of dangerous times at times, because let's say people were quite confrontational with the police. You know, there were people who were really enjoyed confrontation with the police then. But anyway, great fun. Great fun. So that's Paris. And then I go to Liverpool because at that stage I'm studying English at university. And I go to Liverpool for a year, and I go to Eric's maybe 3 times a week, and I saw Gang of Four, Cabaret Voltaire, all the bands that were on, Echo and the Bunnymen, but I also saw the Undertones and Stiff Little Fingers. By the time I came back to Paris, I really developed a taste for Irish punk bands. Really, there was a shop then in Paris called Neuros. And like in any other capital city, I think, at that stage, there was a record shop which was like a social club for people to meet. And on Thursday, they used to get the imports. And on Thursday, that's when you got your money and you got your singles. So we got the singles by Protex, The Outcast, all the Irish punk bands from the north mostly. Because in my perception, and I'm not saying it's the truth, the development of Irish punk was a tad later than in the north, because there was Terry Hooley, who was really promoting his bands outside of the north, so we had access to that, and then I actually saw the Virgin Prunes in the Grand Rex, and that was a complete revelation. I didn't even know what was happening there, because Gavin Friday was wearing his Molly Maguire outfit. I had no idea what Molly Maguires were, needless to say. But at that stage, I was studying English, as I said, in university, after translating Alice Cooper. And we did a module about Anglo-Irish literature, and in that module there was Sean Casey. We studied Sean Casey, which is the reason I'm here in Ireland, and it is the reason why I have my children here in Ireland, basically, because Sean Casey. So Sean O'Casey means that I have access to, I skipped the bit about the radio station in Paris. Is that okay?
That's
Because we'll skip
yeah.
to Mick
Yeah.
McCon. Basically, when I was in Paris, I had access to, we were doing a pirate radio show where we would play the singles that we were buying in the shop, you know, on a Thursday. And the program was called Blitzkrieg Pop. So that was series 1, season 1. Anyway, got to Ireland in the French department in Trinity College, and lo and behold, in my first years, there's this guy, I mean, serendipity is the word I was telling you, you know, really. This guy in the first year with a Mohican hairstyle, I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, that was Mick McCon. Couldn't believe my luck. We just hit it off. At that stage, I was trying to tell my students not to listen to Jacques Brel and all these people. That was just like so boring. You know, I revised my opinion since, but I was trying to encourage them to listen to those bands, those French bands, Guernica, Berrurier. So, as it happened, Michael McCon was in the first year when I met him, and it sounded like at that stage there was a huge difference in the age gap. Like he was 18 and I was, 24 or something like this. Something, you know. But anyway, a great friendship, we're still friends, and yes, so I eventually stayed, because I met my husband on the barricades in Trinity. It was the first time that the cleaning staff were on strikes. Do you remember that? Yeah. Anyway, the second year I was here, Mick McCahan went for Ents officer, and that really, really opened up a whole load of things. You know, for me, really, in terms of going to see bands. You have here some of the best bands in the world. The Golden Horde. 1, 2, 3, 4, Simon Carmody. Absolutely the best band in the world, best live band. You know, so then La Yadia. Oh yeah, I mean, great thing with Mick McCon that we did in the DIY stories is it was 1984 and Reagan was coming to Ireland. So we were on the anti-Reagan campaign, and we had decided to burn an American flag in front of the embassy. And at that stage, there weren't any bars in front of the American embassy. So all was grand, except we couldn't buy an American flag. A, we didn't have money to spend on that. And B, we wouldn't be spending our money on an American flag. So we took a sheet and we painted an American flag with paint from the shop, you know, stencil for the stars and everything. Anyway, it was raining that day, and we tried to burn the flag, and we then looked at the paint, and it was whatever, hydro, you know, anti-burn paint, basically. So we burnt about a third of the flag, and I still have I actually found the flag about 6 months ago in my attic, and I failed to show. Mick came to visit us a few weeks ago, and I actually failed to show him the remnants of the flag, but it exists. It's in my house.
Okay. This conversation hasn't gone the way I expected.
Oh,
it.
right.
But if any of you want burning tips, Danielle will be available later. But thanks a million to Danielle. And you know, there's times where I think I go to gigs a lot, but then I realise I don't, because Eugene's at every gig that I go to, and then he's talked about once that I've missed. So Eugene Connolly is a mainstay, a really important figure in encouraging so many Dublin bands at different periods in a very genuine way. So Eugene, like, where did you start going to gigs and buying records? Where did that impulse come from?
Hello. Well, people were talking about their history from birth or whatever, you know. I remember I lived in my parents for a few years when I was about 6 or 7. And 2 of my aunts had gone over to emigrate to Canada. And they left behind their Beatles records and Leonard Cohen stuff. And I remember playing those, you know, and getting into them, whatever, before I ever knew anything, you know. Could be argued I still don't, but... and then rolling on with Top of the Pops and all that sort of stuff, and the glam rock and everything, you know, I thought was brilliant. The All Grey Whistle Test. I remember seeing Tom Waits on the, you know, the piano has been drinking, and sort of, what the hell is that? You know, but I was hooked, you know. And then rolling on to my teens, my early teens, I was in the youth club, and a mate of mine and myself, we became the house DJs, and then we formed a mobile disco. So, you know, I have serious credibility and all that, but just to, you know, burst this bubble, it was called Magic Moments Mobile Disco. Right? And, but, so we did, you know, schools and youth clubs and whatever, and it was a brilliant period in my life. And then I was going out with this girl, hairdresser, and she was telling me that her friend in the hairdressers, her boyfriend was a singer in a band, and punk had broke at this stage, and I was just obsessed, you know. Every week there was a new record, you know, the Ruts, you know, whatever was coming out, and it was just mind-blowing for me. And obviously the Pistols and the whole Nevermind Bollocks stuff and the Clash and everything, and so we went out on a double date. I've written about this, so I don't mean to repeat myself, but in the Brock Inn, just outside Famous, and so it turns out her boyfriend was a guy, Christy Dignan, you know, so, well, great. And within 5 minutes, it was just me and him, just, you know, rapping all night. The girls were, you know, and so he asked me would I like to come along to rehearsal. So I said, yeah, sure. So I went to a shed in the back garden in Finglas, and he had a band called Electron at the time. And they were a covers band, and Joe Joel, the guitarist, and he had a Les Paul copy, you know, which, you know, seemed to be a big deal at the time, but you get to know these things. And I couldn't believe his voice. It was just so powerful, do you know what I mean? And at the end, I was about 16, you know, at the end of it, he said, what do you think? And I said, yeah, you're amazing, brilliant, but the songs you're playing, you know, they were doing Lizzie numbers and stuff like that, they were all fine, but I said, you know, you want to get rid of all that stuff, like that's out the window, you know, want to start doing punk stuff, that's where it's at and all that. And to my amazement to this day, he took me at my word and broke up the band. And yeah, and so we formed a new band, which was called Mila 18, and that name came out of a hat on my bed in my box room, you know, and where I lived on Ballington Avenue. And I subsequently found out the drummer, Timo, I got 2 of the guys in the band. There's a guy, Mick McKenna, who was over from East London. He knew the Depeche Mode guys and all that, you know, so but anyway, the drummer confided eventually that he had put four names into the thing, all the Tombs, you know, so it could have been the Tombs, but it turned out to be Mila 18, which is Christy's idea. He'd been reading this Leon Uris trilogy and all this sort of stuff. So we started putting some gigs together, and we talked about the Ivy Rooms and things like that, and the Baggett supported some great bands back then. And the bands that were happening, and they all seemed to be local. I lived in Finglas East, so that was like, Bono was just across the road, the Prunes, all that. So I was at all those early gigs, you know, which really informed my aesthetic, if you like. And it seemed to be right in the heart of everything that was happening, you know. And then I got a phone call through, well, Vox magazine, which I want to give a big shout out to the brilliant Dave Clifford, who's still going, you know, and possibly doing some work with him soon. And so he had the original, we're talking about fanzines here, you know, I used to read Vox cover to cover 10 times, like it informed everything for me. And he rang me and said he'd like to do an interview with Mila 18. It blew my mind, right? So we came out to the house and we did the shots in front and the back garden, and we had the chat and all that. And there it was in Vox magazine. So, you know, a biog about the band, and then me, manager, you know, and I'm 16. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, you know. So that was all great. 10 Actually, the first gig was in my back garden, would you believe, and the second one was in Ballymun Comprehensive School. Like, so I was kind of leading the thing, you know. So then roll on to Aslan, which I had nothing to do with, you know, I have to say. And I got to College of Marketing and Design, which, you know, again informed my aesthetics and stuff like that as well. And then when I finished that, I went to London. So the Aslan thing was cooking up in the meantime. So, but I kind of missed all that. Although I remember the first album, Feeling of Shame, was released, and they had a big contract, CBS or EMI or somebody. And I remember being on Oxford Street in London, and the whole windows of Virgin Records were covered with this, and I just remember like bursting out tears, like it was just, this is astonishing. And then they played a gig in the Rock Garden in Covent Garden, and it was Bert Christie had the bare feet at the time, and mate of mine like jumped up on the stage and started kissing his feet, and Chris, what's going on here, you know? And so I got to introduce him about 5 years ago. This is a guy, he said, "You're the fucking lunatic that freaked me out." Anyway, but I somehow sequestered Christian to come back to my place where I was living, you know. My bio was about squats, you know, it's a very small part of my history, but it was the 80s, and so he came back, and we had a great night. He didn't stay, eventually left. And I heard years later that the manager was gone crazy because they got, you know, Chris has gone off doing something nefarious, you know. So we always retained our friendship, and then moving on, I went to America, got a green card, went to America, blah, blah, blah. And, in London as well, I should mention that there was a big Cork contingent where I lived in Brixton, so there was bands like Stump, Marco Disney, That Petrol Motion, stuff like that, you know, which I was obsessive about. And I think I wrote a couple of stories for you about like my favourite gigs ever, whatever. I mentioned the Ramones and the State Cinema, which, you know, the cinema seats, like you were right on top of the band, the noise, the visuals, it was just blew my mind, you know. And then famously for me, I saw the Clash out in the Top Hat as well. Virgin Prune supported them. The Clash were to play Belfast the previous night, but there was something to do with insurance or whatever, so there was chaos there. So they came down. I was in town that afternoon, Saturday afternoon, and just at the kind of junction of Henry Street and Moore Street, and the Clash just arrived, you know, Johnny Green, the big tall manager and all that, and I was going, "Oh, it's the Clash," and it's going, "Yeah, it is them." Actually, it was Bernie Rhodes. Yeah, and you know, no, I couldn't, you know, I was a kid, you know. But I went to the gig that night with my brand new pair of 16 button Doc Martens, you know, Oxblood, you know, and I was really self-conscious that they were a bit too kind of shit I knew. But at the gig anyway, if I may say, you know, the gig was just astonishing. Who was supporting the Virgin Prunes? My pals, right? So they sent David Bussard, Scott Watts in 1980 out first, and David had meningitis, so he had a very unusual kind of, you know, thing, maybe playing a guitar with 2 strings on it and all that sort of stuff. So that freaked out all the audience, and the audience that would have been at the Belfast, Nordy audience, all came down to Dublin for this gig because, so they hadn't got a clue about any of this stuff, you know. So then the 2 lads walked out, and Googie was in some sort of dress, and Gavin had a plastic see-through suit on that he always says his mother like was his seamstress, you know. And halfway through the gig, the trousers split and everything fell out, and it's like, just wow. So when I wrote about it, I said, you know, the meeting 2 veg were swinging east and west and stuff like that. But this was all too much for the Nordy skinheads, you know, and they were like, kill the queers, you know. I said, jeez, and it was a really heavy atmosphere anyway, you know. And the speaker stack started going, and the bouncers just pulled them off the stage, and that was the end of it, you know. And everything calmed down. And then after a while, Gav minces back out onto the stage, still the same condition, you know, with this flamboyant, you know, and I think, it's him again, you know. And he walked up to the mic and he goes, "White Riot, I want to write it my own." And I just thought, oh yes, that's the best thing. But anyway, then the clash happened, and it was a rainy night, and we finished at 11 or so we walked up to Dunleary to get a bus back. Too late. Oh, fuck, we're going to have to walk all the way back to town. So back down, Monks down, past the Top Hat again, and Johnny Green was standing there, and he's, all right lads, we had the gig, yeah, come in, you know. So we ended up in the green room, you know, with about 15 people maybe, loads of food and everything, for, I don't know, an hour or something like that. Got to talk to all of them. Well, Simon didn't say much, you know, and Strummer, there was a guy called Snail who had him in the corner, and you know, whatever he was doing, couldn't get near him. But Jonesy, loads of times with Jonesy, and I remember saying to him, geez, your hair's very long, like, you know, what do you mean? I said, I do with a haircut, you know. I'm 16, you know. And he says, yeah, I only got a cut last week, you cheeky bugger, you know. I fucking say that. But I got all the, you know, the plastic or paper plates signed and all that. I had them up on my wall and all that sort of stuff, you know, for years. And so that was, that, you know, I was in, and that was it. So anyway, I went to London, and then I went to America, and then I came back. And when I came back, Aslan had split up, and the Precious Stones were an ongoing concern. They had 3 or 4 singles with solid records, so they asked me to manage them. Now, I just set up a new company, a different thing, Colossal Graphics, but so I kind of formed a kind of a company, well, it wasn't really, but Colossal Management. So I did that for 2 years, and I mean, I joke that I'm still in therapy over those 2 years, you know, with the lads. It was quite a thing. But Christy had the Digging and Goth thing then happening, so they were playing in the Bagot, and I dragged Joe Joel along to see them. Now, they weren't talking at all, like, you know, so came along, got talking, and eventually got the band back together and all that. So, you know, I feel I had a little hand in that, you know. They wrote Crazy World and on that went, you know. So that was that, and then I was raising kids and all that, and then in 2015 I read No Off Switch by Andy Kershaw, and it resonated with me, so I contacted him and I said, hey Andy, your book is, you know, would you like to come over and do a gig now? Well, really? So got him over to Howth, to the Abbey Tavern in Howth, and it was just amazing. And sorry, I won't give you, just to say though, a pal of mine who's a professional promoter said to me, if you're going to do this promoting thing, you gotta not just have your bands or people you like, you know, that's never going to make you any money. So I had to think about this, and I thought, well then I'm not going to be a promoter, like I only want to be personally invested in the music that I like, and so that was that. And then got involved in a few different bands along the way, and been sort of at it ever since, you know.
Brilliant.
There you go.
Mad many stories.
Thanks very much. Thanks for asking. By the way, it just occurs to me that this is the stillest this man has ever stayed on the stage the last 2 years. He's probably gone crazy. Thanks a lot.
You know, most of us listen to the Sex Pistols, but Merrill goes on tour with John Lydon and Peel. So, where did music come into your life? You know.
My dad was a drummer in a Dublin band called Guernica back in the day, and that would have been the insight into music for me. I remember hearing loud noises coming from downstairs and cans being snapped open at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then a drum kit being absolutely bashed on in my granny's house. And then I'd wake up and partake in this absolute madness, and I guess that's how I turned out to be a drummer for 15 odd years, and touring bands in America and here and Canada. And then Merrill Streak I started 2 years ago, but yeah, it's a lot different from my drumming days. But yeah, I guess my dad being a drummer would be a huge part into the inside of the music, yeah.
And what kind of music? Because you know, you're not easy to pigeonhole. Like, what are you listening to, and what were you listening to?
So when I was drumming, I played in a lot of sight bands. I used to straighten my hair into a bowl cut and stuff. There are photos somewhere, but I really try to avoid them. But I was always into punk, always into it, but I just kind of got pigeonholed into the sight thing, so I was doing that for a long time, and then Meryl Streep was finally my way of going, okay, fuck, I can finally start doing something that I enjoy and got something back out of, you know, so that's kind of what you're seeing at the moment.
Now, you are a force of nature on stage. Like, is it exhausting, or is it a catharsis, or is it just something you have to do?
I actually don't know. I think it's something I have to do. Yeah, it's weird when you get up there and you get into that mode. I just don't give a shit. You know what I mean? And I think that really helps what the project is all about. It's about getting the message across. And yeah, I'm so shy when I'm not doing Meryl Streep. Do you know what I mean? I've been sat here wondering why there's a plug on the ceiling for the last 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And then I realised it's a projector, so that's what's going through my mind. But yeah, I don't know. And it's Meryl Streep is a force of nature, I guess. But I love it, and yeah, it just makes me do something that I'm proud of. You know.
Yeah, and the electricity in the room has been generated by Meryl jiggling his leg. But you're incredibly disciplined in terms of your output. Like, you're very, very prolific. Like, where does that come from? Like, that ability to get up and start writing or working on?
I think it's 15 years being a drummer. I learned a lot from playing in bands, and I think I've been in maybe 4 bands that were pretty serious at the time. I learned what we did wrong and how we went about it. And when Meryl Streep started, it was a real pen to paper moment where I was like learning from all my mistakes, and I really just thought it through. That's kind of where it started from. And I can't remember the question. What did you say?
I can't either. So
Yeah.
you answered it perfectly. But you're going places that a lot of Irish artists don't get to. So the Public Image Limited Tour, obviously, but Greece, is there a difference with what you do and how it's received? Like, is there some pushback from audiences?
No, well, I mean, yeah, on that Pill tour I had about 3. Well, you have to remember, I did 19 gigs screaming at Tories every single night, you know what I mean? So I was up against it, and it was one of the hardest tours I've ever done mentally, because I was ready for these, and by the end of it I won a lot of them over, but there was three incidents where it nearly ended up in fist fights, in the middle of the crowd. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately, when you mix different political beliefs. But after that tour kind of ended, I found out that that's why I was picked. They wanted to ruffle feathers, and that's what they did. They put me in the middle of a bunch of Tories and let me see what the crack is, So yeah, no, that was definitely one of the hardest mental tours I've ever done. I think, yeah, it was nearly 4 weeks,
And what do you listen to? Like, what informs the kind of the lyrical flow? Obviously, the politics, the attitude. You're fighting for a better world. Who do you think has done that in a way that's you've thought they're really good at what they do?
Honestly, like I always go back to the same references. I love Sack, and I love A House, and I love all these Dublin bands that, like, when I think about kind of religion in Ireland, I think about Father Ted being so ahead of its time back then, and it's nothing to do with Joe Rooney being in a band with my dad or anything. It's just such a pinnacle in TV comedy, And I think Christians coming out at the time it did as well. What did the Christians ever do for us was ballsy. Do you know what I mean? It really was, like, in Catholic Ireland times. So stuff like that. And A House, I've always had a love for Dave Cowes, because he just has this way, a way of saying things in a sarcastic manner. So stuff like that was a huge influence. And then my dad was obviously into Crass and Rudimentary Peni and stuff like that, so I kind of had that as well. And yeah, kind of stuff like that. But at the moment I listen to a lot of hardcore music that probably no one would ever know. That's from my time in Vancouver, just kind of learning a lot of North American punk and hardcore. And then again, I love listening to instrumental music. Meryl Streep was meant to be instrumental. It was never meant to have vocals. So the first time I ever used the microphone was really to record in the 796. And I just wanted to make an instrumental music because I love sitting on the bus and just listening to elevator music. So that's kind of what does it for me, really. It's not even punk. It's just, I don't know, something to zone out to, yeah.
Fantastic, and I'm such a fan. It's embarrassing for us to be having this conversation.
Thank you.
But check it out. When you can, and thanks for.
Cheers. Thank you.
And then any music scene has its historians, has the chroniclers, has the people who are telling the stories, who are championing bands that might only ever get to do one interview. And we're delighted that they're here. And how did you get into music, and where did you decide I've got to get the bands that I like into print if I have to do it myself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely, first of all, I want to thank you both, and thanks Michael and Niall for putting me on this panel. It's great to be here, and it's lovely to like be part of this community and have these conversations. So yeah, thank you for considering zines as part of your panel. I guess it's kind of an unconventional route into DIY culture, and specifically like punk and underground kind of music, because I came into it specifically looking through, I was like really into publishing and distribution of printed matter. So I wasn't like necessarily like one of these people being like, oh, I was at a gig and I saw this punk scene, like it would be a very clean cut story. I think if I was to look back on it, like I'm from Drogheda, and that's like a big part of what I do. I run a zine fair called Drogheda Zine Fair, and I have an archive of zines called the Underground Zine Archive, and both of them are really connected to the placemaking and the DIY culture in that place. But I guess in terms of why I kind of started it and why I got into it was because I started working in bookshops, initially in Dublin. With Chapters actually, and I have a colleague here from Chapters of 10 years ago who came tonight, so it's a nice full circle. So I was just really interested in books and publishing. And then I moved to Edinburgh at one point, and I remember going to like an Edinburgh anarchist feminist zine fair. It was really specific, and it was like huge in Glasgow and Edinburgh at the time. Like zines were massive. This is probably like 2010s, and I found a copy of Scum Manifesto and like witches and midwives and shit like this, and I was like, what? And it was just like a very base introduction to like anarchist feminist theory, but also I had never considered it because at the time I was in and out probably of working in bookshops, and I never really considered the fact that you could just like assemble your own thing and like put it in a publication and like staple it and make it happen. And this was all like, this wasn't music fanzines at this stage, like this was all like political pamphlets, and a lot of it was bootlegged as well. So I then from there was kind of interested in DIY publishing, but at a very base level, and not, I guess, really understanding the whole punk culture behind it. And then at later points, I worked, actually when I first met Niall, I was working in a bookshop that had a more kind of like bigger interest in independent publishing, specifically in Ireland, and we took in a lot of zines. And I think, to be honest, I mean, I'd love to say that I was at like a punk gig when I was like 12 and I found like a really obscure fanzine, but it was actually probably in this bookshop. And like loads of people were like come in, they're like, come here, like I made this like zine, and they were all kind of very arty zines and like all the rest. And then one of the first ones was actually who I have here, which is Punks, who is in the audience tonight, is probably selling copies of this as well. Just a plug. And Meryl Streep's also in it, so it's just like a full round table here. So Punks Zine. And then there was this other zine called Swarm Zine. And I was looking at it, I was like, this is deadly. And it was like loads of like local gigs, and like I was like, oh, this is really cool. And it was just really like cut and paste, scan, like you could totally see how it was made. And then I found out like after about a month, this person was from Cullen, which is like this village in County Louth, which is like Drogheda from County Louth. So I was like, amazing, like that's so cool. And then I found out she was like not even done her leaving cert. She was just like essentially this child in her bedroom, just like making this incredibly prolific fanzine. So then I became a bit like obsessed with the fanzines. And I suppose I do myself a disservice in that like Drogheda's always been, I would say, like an apex of like counterculture and like weird metal, hardcore, and I think we've contributed a lot to the Dublin punk scene over like a long time. So DIY culture in Drogheda has always been there, and when I went out as a teenager without really fully even like considering it, it wasn't like being in a city where you can like pick what you're into. It was kind of like, oh, come here, your friend's putting on a gig, and then I go, and it was like some gnarly little gig from Gremlins in like Sellers. So I did understand it, I just never really considered it as its like own entity. I just sort of thought like there's a local gig in the town and that's what they look like. So then I guess combining all these things basically, so I discovered this like, fanzine from Cullen from like a teenager. And then with the context too of like Drogheda and having this DIY scene, I then was like deadly, and I wanted to run a zine fair, because at the time in the bookshop there was like loads of zines popping in and out, and I was like, yeah, it'd be really cool. There's no zine fair in Dublin at the moment. It had ended a couple of years ago. There was legendary Cork Zine Fest, which is great, and they've been like doing some fantastic work. So then I was like, right, I'll run a zine fair in my hometown in Drogheda, because like, fuck it, and like Drogheda can handle it, and just like, let's see what happens. And at the time, one of someone I knew in the town, I was like, you know, looking desperately, and I knew Brian Haggerty, who runs 3345, and he Drag Acid is his kind of like zine, and it's like a kind of fanzine. It's more kind of like conceptual. It's like it comes with like a little disc, and an artist collaborates with a musician, and they make a combined zine. So it's really interesting. So I was like, come here, Brian, like, will you run the zine fair with me? Because like, you're a man who like, he's been running zines for a while. We know there's this person out in Cullen. She made a really good fanzine. So like, it's 2 people in County Louth, you know, in the local area that will definitely be interested in this. So then we ran the first zine fair in Drogheda in January, just this year. And I was quite nervous about it, because it's not like in Dublin, and I think it's an important point to make. Like, a lot of the speakers tonight have been like, you know, punk culture exists in cities, and there's a lot of activity happening in suburbs and small towns, and you have to be really fucking ballsy sometimes to go up there and do it. And sometimes the DIY scene isn't out of a choice, it is out of a compulsion, and it's out of the fact that there's literally not a single thing there. And a lot of the time, like the way I fell into it, it was just because it was there, and because my friends were in it, or like it was a local gig on a Saturday night, and that's why I went to it. So there wasn't the same like consciousness around it. So then we ran the zine fair, and it was great, and it worked out well. And then after the zine fair, I was like, grand, we'll keep that as like a once a year event to keep it like snazzy. And I was surprised at the uptake that it had, because I guess it wasn't in Dublin and people had to travel in. And there was a good few heads from Meath and Louth, and a lot of people from like up north as well, which has always been a good contingency in Drogheda. So we had like a nice healthy, like heady mix of zine makers basically. So then around May, I then set up this archive project called the Underground Zine Archive, because, why did I do it? Because I'd done this event called Punks in Print, DIY Publishing and Punk Culture in Ireland, which is a big fancy title that I gave myself to it. And I had interviewed a couple of people as part of the Dublin Art Book Fair. And it was a panel event. So I was in your shoes, I got to like question people, not be in the hot seat. And I was talking to them about like being in punk culture and the correlation between making your own publications, and none of them had applied to the Dublin Art Book Fair. And I was like, that's quite interesting. And I guess I realized at that point that there's like this whole area of DIY publishing that like only happens at like gigs and like in these like random little moments, and they don't belong in like other more formalized bookshops or in art book fairs or in artist publishing, or even in a really like, you know, strong sense of DIY publishing. There is systems of distribution and publishing, and there are just people making the stuff in their bedroom, and sometimes it's just luck. So then I decided to do this archive, which specifically focused on what I threw out there was like punk, weirdo and bootleg zines. So it was just like a really sort of like bedroom art, the kind of zine that you pick up at gigs. But what if you didn't get to go to those gigs because it happened in the late 80s? Or what if, you know, it was in a different county and you've just been sitting, you know, like, so it was that kind of thing. So I've been running that, but it's like a real chill archive. Like, I don't actually know how many zines are in it. It's like pop-up, it's thrives on its like kind of anarchy of it. It's just like, it doesn't have any categories except the fact that it's like weird and punky. And I just kind of I go to gigs, skate parks. I was at a bog out in RD that was a fun one. So we just like bring the zines and then we like see what happens. So it's more like a social project than a formal archive. But there is a whole generation of young zine makers, and I would like to say this because another person's in the room I'm going to plug as well, who I literally just met at the bar. But I have heard of your zine, Shy Hawk, first issue. So there's like these really like young zine makers that are all making these like fanzines and these like retro, you know, like old school punk scenes, and they all are about like the DIY scene in some shape or another. and they're all there, and it's happening and it's growing, and it's really exciting to be a part of it today at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Rita. You know, and sincere thanks for preserving culture, for nurturing the next people, for, you know, doing something social with someone who's made something in their bedroom, and, you know, they've made it out of love, they haven't thought about it, and, you know, you've come to it, which I love, through distribution and interest in how things get in front of people. So there's a lovely crossover with what Tina does. Tina Kinsella is someone who's renowned for encouraging research, encouraging students to dig deep into things that matter to them. Like, it doesn't have to be some kind of great moment in history. So, Tina, like, how did music come into your world, and, you know, did you feel you were part of a scene, or were you just happy listening to music?
I just want to say, first of all, that I don't quite know why I'm with all these amazing legends on the two panels who've had so much to say about music, and what I've been saying is coming from a really personal point of view. But I suppose I was the daughter, or the oldest child of an Irish immigrant family in a kind of rough part of Dublin. And I suppose my childhood, I really resonate with what Francis was saying. Everything came to me from everyone else, and it came from my mum and dad, who there'd be a fight over, I want to say the turntable, but it wasn't. It was actually a piece of furniture with a hinge and everything, you know, at that time when you put the records in. And and, you know, it'd be Jim Reeves, or it would be the Platters, or it would be the Righteous Brothers, or Elvis Presley, the Irish show bands. They were my earliest influences. But then also in the area that I lived, it was a very diverse immigrant community. So the other really big influence musically, which I think has stayed with me my whole life, was really the kind of dispersed Caribbean community that lived around me, actually. So my very young memory of music is from walking around the streets of that part of West London with these big Victorian houses, and they were all split up into flats. And they were often painted these amazing colours with these steps going up, and there'd be people sitting outside, the windows would be open, and there'd be reggae, ska, lovers rock pouring out the windows, and everybody would be sitting around smoking. So and I think that love of that roots of music has really stayed with me all of my life. And then I suppose another really big moment was I'm going really analogue here now, because my mum ordered this when I was about 11 or 12, I think. My mum ordered this series of albums off of the television. Do you remember when that used to happen? Yeah. So every month a double album would arrive into their house of music that I just had never heard before. So Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Billie Holiday. And I remember hearing her singing and thinking, I couldn't really identify with their experiences because I was too young, but I felt the pain and I felt all the emotion. You know, the first time I heard Velvet Underground, the Kinks, and it just was a lid coming off in your brain, isn't it? That's what it is, and it gives you a sense of kind of belonging and connection, and it takes you outside of your world and your experience. And it allows you to inhabit multiple worlds. And I think that love of music, there isn't a day goes by that I don't listen to music. And that's just stayed with me and become ever richer, I suppose, through life, through the amazing people I've met that have introduced me to music. That's a really big thing about music, isn't it? Is, you know, what are the richness that other people bring into your lives. And so thinking about music is a lot about friendship too.
And you mentioned analog, which, you know, is my happy place. Were there records or concerts, or was it just that lovely feeling that you get when you're walking down the street and you hear someone blasting some reggae music?
Yeah.
You know, are there live music experiences that rocked your world like that?
Yeah, I mean, loads. I got thrown into complete crisis when you said to me, when you talk about a record, like, where do you start? So this is nearly a mashup between Joan Armatrading and Jimmy Cliff and Edith Piaf or something like that. But I think you did ask me to speak about a song, and I might come back to that, but in terms of a live music experience, I suppose that was just, there's so many, but one that was totally bizarre was when I was in my early 20s, I moved to live in Waterford. That's where my dad's family is from. And you know Vincent Power, who had the
mean fiddler.
The Mean Fiddler, was from County Waterford. And do you remember in Tremor?
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. So there's this massive festival, music festival in Tremor. It was a beautiful weekend, like burning the rocks up. And Ray Charles played, Jerry Lee Lewis played, Van Morrison played.
We played.
You played, and do you remember? Sorry, I'm just trying to
Dylan
think.
played as well.
Dylan played, but I'm just trying to think. Sorry, Christy Moore had to come on and improvise early because Ray Charles couldn't land his airplane at Waterford Airport. But a really magical moment for me was Joan Byers, who, and it was an extraordinary setting because Tremor Racecourse is up on the bay, out looking over the bay, and she told a story about every song and brought everybody in this, which was totally bizarre, can you imagine, in the middle of Waterford, Tremor Racecourse, brought everybody into this completely intimate space. And these really young people who probably didn't really know her music and didn't really know the social history of her music, and she just wove a spell around everyone. So that really stays with me. Actually, is a really special moment. There's loads, but that one I think was odd and amazing.
Spectacular. And a record, a song that meant a lot to you.
I really had a crisis about it, but I really actually decided to go. It's a capture of a live recording, and it's a song I listen to very often, and I can't always get to the end of it because I find it completely heartbreaking. And it's that aspect of music that can completely undo you, where you can completely feel your own solitude or your own loneliness, love, heartache, pain. You can feel that of another person, and the gift of music to enable you to inhabit the emotional world of another is extraordinary, isn't it? So the song that I thought I would say that I think I'd always have to have with me, one of many, would be Stars by Nina Simone, but obviously it's Janice Ian. Because that song, and I only found out that it was written by Janice Ian because I had listened to, I had heard Nina Simone singing it, I think it was at Montreux in 1976, as the live version. And it just speaks of failure and frustration and, you know, the challenges that life throws at you, but ultimately it invites everyone to connect through telling their own stories. And I suppose, you know, that's often also what music means to me.
What a perfect way to sum up the entire evening. Thank you very much to the panel too. It's probably 3 minutes before the raffle, so if you can do whatever you do.